Thanks, Jacques. I think tonight all our thoughts are on the Perigee Badaroon, wishing her a speedy and full recovery, and that she'll be back soon reading her gentle poems to us. Thank you for coming tonight, because I'm trying to do something difficult. I'm trying to bridge the chasm between poetry, physics, astronomy, and astronautics. I attempt this using the poet's crafts of irony, witticism, double meanings, allusions, metaphors, and alliteration. Sometimes a poem was inspired by an image or a painting or an event, and we'll look at that. I'll assume tonight's audience will get my literary and biblical allusions, but I will give you a few footnotes verbally where it's a science or engineering allusion or metaphor. Now let's try to see if we can screen share here. Oh, good. Is that up for everybody, the screen share? Right, I'll assume it is.
No, but try again.
Okay. Let me just get back. Right, first click on screen share, then click on, now where did that go to? Goodness sake, has something disappeared? Well, just give me a minute to, aha. Right, has it come up now?
No. Do you want me to do it from my computer for you?
Let me make one last attempt here. I click on screen share, and now I click on the cosmonauts. Has it come up now?
No.
Oh, well, I'll have to leave it over to you to do that, please.
Okay.
Something's gone funny on my computer.
There we go. Can people see that?
Yes, I can. Right. This is a poem where the title is longer than the text. True Confessions, who really gave Nick Copernicus the idea that Ptolemy and the church had got it all wrong. One moonful night, Copernicus's lover whispered, "Darling, the earth moved." Galileo published a newsletter called The Starry Messenger, and my poem is called The Unstarry Messenger, dedicated to Galileo Galilei. It's hard to live up to being a legend when your back aches and your sight's failing, and you only wanted to be a telescope salesman, not a martyr, discovering spots on the sun, phases of Venus, moons orbiting Jupiter, measuring mountains on the moon, as low as the mountains in Italy between University and Inquisition. 1616, Vatican bans Earth from orbiting around the sun. Galileo Galilei's telescope couldn't see. The day it shattered the crystalline spheres of the heavens would be the day Vatican politics shat all over you. For 206 years, the hard pawn of Dr. Pole and Professor Pise rotted on the index. 1822, Vatican unbans Earth from orbiting around the sun. Starry-eyed messenger bearing the truth, discoverers are never ahead of their time. The establishment is behind the times. 1992, Vatican apologizes to Galileo. After 13 years of appeal hearings, the Politburo of the Vatican Central Committee pronounced that during the Inquisition's proceedings, grave violations of Catholic legality brought canon law into disrepute and rules. Galileo Galilei is posthumously rehabilitated from false charges of Copernicanism, Protestantism, Marxism, masturbation, and letting your telescope eat meat on Friday. Now for a change of tone of voice, this poem is called We Who Are Not Angels. We who are not angels, nor born with wings, nor tithe of virtue to ascend to heaven. We had only slide rules, now software. We who turn equation into turbo pump, who crafts metal to take flight. We who gave birth to the impossible, a pulse of fire soaring, a glint of light. And on the same theme, ascension. If you are a saint, you can ascend to heaven on a wing and a prayer. But as for the rest of us, we're going to need lots and lots of taxpayers. Now, poets have classically used the moon and stars as metaphor for romance and love. So let me make 2 attempts at that. The man in the moon. Seismologist, selenologist told the man in the moon, every 14 days, when you're closest, when you're furthest, deep moonquakes peak 1,000 kilometers down in the heart. So far, so faint, they tremors no one can feel. You said, it is ended. I leave. No Eurydice followed me, only emptiness. The man in the moon, mooning around, found the world without sound, with only light and dark. Here is no wind nor water, only dust and rock. There is no love on the symbol of love, nor grief. In this place, there is but sky and stone stung by meteors. Unlike Lot's wife, I could not look back. Molten salt burned within. And another poem on a happier note, Full Moon. Through a missing slat in the blind, a friendly moonbeam plays across my lover's breast. I follow its lead. Now I'm going to improvise and build a bit on what the classical poets did. I argue that not only the moon and astronomy, but also astronautic spaceflight can provide metaphors for romance and for loss. Now, in space navigation, when one body is circling around another body and you want to calculate where it's all going to end up at, you need to measure 7 things. And one of those things is called argument of perigee. Even in weightlessness, carnations bloom. In that window box of a greenhouse called Oasis, bolted onto space station Mir, a most bearable lightness bin, Russian cosmonauts hang out. It sort of relaxes you better than aluminum faxes. But while the carnations bloomed, they never bore seed. No argument parted us, but argument of perigee, a precession of circumstances, the diverging orbits of 2 lives, 2 spaceships that passed in the night. Now, the next poem uses the ride of Apollo the 13 as a metaphor for divorce. And it is, of course, titled, quote, Houston, we have a problem. Between moon and earth, two bodies fall through space, trapped in this broken structure. Quote, bus B, voltage falling. First amp spike. Now falling voltage. Two bodies deprived of purpose, dead in their coupling, plummet through a darkening space. Quote, oxygen tank 2, 0. Oxygen tank 1, pressure falling. How frail is this foil sheet of sleep as we fall through it, emptying into night. We key home, home, down to earth. This rejoining is our parting with feet on the ground. Now we're going to move from Houston to the other side of the world. This poem is dedicated to Qian Shuxin, who is the founder of the Chinese spaceflight program. A classical name of the Chinese Empire was the Celestial Empire, and I'm here going to give that title a double meaning. I need to mention that in the Chinese Empire, the office doors of a mandarin was painted in vermilion as an insignia of rank. The line, let fly a new moon, refers to Qian Shuxin's launch of China's first satellite in 1970, and Jiquan is a Chinese spaceport. The Celestial Empire, the great ocean, two shores, two realms, the western shore, jade, the eastern shore, Coca-Cola, above the realm that calls. On the eastern shore, you, Father, birthed the rocket. Their door that clanged behind you was not lacquered in vermilion. On the western shore, renaissance of flying dragons, you, midwife, let fly a new moon. You, bamboo, too often battered by madness of typhoons. Feng Jisheng smiles with Qian Shuxin to see the 5th Academy, the 7th Ministry, fly Dongfang Hong and Shenzhou, build from Jiquan a Silk Road to the sky. Now from China, let's go over to the USA. And this elegy I consecrate to the 14 astronauts who died on the Space Shuttle Challenger and Shuttle Columbia. These are the laws of physics, immutable as those of the Medes and Persians. You, frailness of flesh and skin, wrapped in only blueprints and hope, to plunge through furnace of plasma, burning, blasted, luminous beyond Mach molten, torn molecules, pink and purple, cremating you as Sati to the sky. They vanished, became sky, a rain of metal tears upon the land. Writhing, the contrail became a cenotaph, a wreath we laid on our voyage to world. Now, on Space Shuttle Columbia, it orbited through heaven for 17 days, and on re-entry, a wing melted, instantly killing the 7 astronauts on board, including an Israeli called Ilan Ramon. But incredibly, the Israeli's diary and his cloth star of David fluttered 60 kilometers down to earth and survived, and fell to the earth next to a small Texas town called Palestine. So there we have tragedy, pathos, and irony mixed up. I must mention that in the following poem, the stanza "As to the Yellow Star" is a quotation from the most famous poem of an Israeli poet, Dan Pagas. a star of David fell from heaven. This lance of fire, this blowtorch of plasma, these crematoria hands of Mach 19 tore one wing off an angel. We fell off Jacob's ladder. So this diary, this cloth star of David, orphaned. Dear Colonel, we regret that your 17-day visa for heaven has expired. As to the yellow star, immediately it will be torn from your chest and will emigrate to the sky. As to your blue star, immediately it will be torn from your chest and will repatriate you to the earth. Tumbling, we fluttered 60 kilometers down. We stumbled onto the earth next to Palestine. Now, I'm going to argue that as well as the moon and stars, we can use the aurora as metaphors for love and romance. And I should here mention, whenever a burst of solar radiation washes over the earth, the southern lights and the northern lights swell up into big rings, so almost identical, the space physicists name them conjugate auroras. And that is, of course, a double meaning that any poet should accept from highlights. Tiaras crown our poles, two luminous rings of beauty, conjugate auroras. With these rings, wed sun and earth, wed earth and sky, for better and for worse, in calm and in storm, till the sun ceased to shine and the earth ceased to spin. Now, the next poem is an ode to the Southern African large telescope, switched on at the start of this century. And this poem celebrates Tebi Medupi, the first Black South African to get a doctorate in astronomy, and Freddie Marang, the first Black South African to be a night assistant. And I preface this ode with some beautiful lines from a Tatankulo Africa poem, quote, "At the mountain's top I reach up, I fill my haversack with stars." It's a beautiful couplet. So here comes first light. When the sun sets, we stand in the falling light, stretch out our arms, catch the falling drops. Medupi and Marang cup our CCD, save all falling photons, deepening into a pool of light whose surface reflects stretch marks from the birth of time, hints of gravity's lenses, the pulse of stars, and mating dance of binary suns. Galaxies digitalized, heaven captured in butterfly nets of circuitry, read on the readout, disk for storage, mysteries solved and sensuous. This poem is called 20th Century Physics. Heisenberg felt uncertain. Planck went all to pieces. Schrödinger put out a saucer of milk. Einstein wasn't perturbed. He knew it was all relative. Now for the next poem, we're going to go over to Russia, and in Moscow, I don't know if you can see it, is a monument to the cosmonauts, which is the biggest monument in the world made out of titanium. And this reminded me that Pushkin wrote a famous poem about another statue called the Bronze Horseman. And in his poem, Pushkin puts words into the mouth of Peter the Great. Here I shall found my city, which shall be my window to the west. I also need to mention that Rastrelli and Zakharov were the two founding architects of St. Petersburg, and Semyorka was the nickname of the rocket which launched Sputnik. And Pushkin's famous poem ends with the lines, where the Empress of the North presents an heir to the throne, from the titanium monument dedicated to Sergei Korolev, the founder of the Soviet and Russian spaceflight program. On a sun-singed step, Sergei stood, said, "Here we shall found our cities, to cut a window through to space, to stand on the sky." Baikonur Cosmodrome. The Ministry for Exciting Machines decreed, "Engineers, let our renaissance begin." Secret Rastrelis and Zakharovs drew. An army of workers dug, constructed steel masts to conduct lightning down, concrete launch pads to guide thunder up. Keys of the cosmos, Sergei's creations, departure halls for Mars's fields, the mountains of the moon, the majesty of orbit, where Semyorka, roaring fire, presents a Sputnik to our planet. Now from the past, let's move to the future. One day, ballistic rockets will be replaced by winged rocket planes, which will be reusable hundreds of times and make space flight less expensive. I should here mention that Sastrugi is the Russian name for a wind-blown ridge of snow which is hardened into ice, and Neve is Swiss French for a patch of white snow on black rock. Now, half a century ago, a famous American author, Erica Jong, wrote a book called Fear of Flying. So I've titled my poem, Joy of Flying. And I preface it with a few lines from the late Peter Horn, a poem called Windsurfers Do It Standing Up. Trust your body, it needs to fly. Your body knows what to do. It is wind against wind, cloud over cloud, sky beyond sky. Very beautiful lines. So here's my joy of flying. Turbines roar, their rush surges through us. Lights dim, a hush descends. Mid-deck silence, only ailerons creak as they lean into the wind, shoulder us up. Our fuselage bumps and rolls on waves of air. Wings tug with wings, high-minded. Tail flaps rudder us awash with direction, speeding this ocean, so insubstantial and infinite. We praise our cities, long surviving. We gaze down in awe on galaxies of lights. Their streets recede below, the great fields too, all shrink into pixels. Port pulses red, starboards green, moons above, clouds below. Aluminum is lighter than air as we slalom through snowscapes of sky. Wings dance us past cloud cornices, sastrugi of air, these neve of atmosphere, soaring. Now rocketing power to leap up steps of air, ascend the stairway of sky until the horizon bends to a ball. Heaven crackles indigo and waits only a memory. Summit beyond summit, ascent above aurora, sound faster than sound, Mach 25, orbit, now to begin. And the next poem is celebrating 15 women pioneers in aviation, astronomy, and astronautics. And the poem is dedicated to Valentina Tereshkova, the first woman to orbit the world in 1963. She's still alive today, aged 85. And I should explain that in the 1960s, all Soviet Russian cosmonauts had to bail out a few kilometers up and land on ground by parachute. And Valentina Tereshkova was selected because she was a champion skydiver. the woman from the Krasny Perikop textile mill. Valentina Tereshkova worked up a new tapestry with weft of silk of parachutes and the warp of skies. From Russia, let's go around the world to the USA and into Pasadena, California, where Jet Propulsion Laboratory make all those amazing planetary space probes. Perched a mountainside shore of the great ocean, you fabricate fleets of robotic Odysseus's, silicon circuitry, electronic pas de deux, dispatched to heaven, deployed to worlds, moons, rings, choreographed by your digital catechisms of ones and zeros, beaming up eternal questions, beaming back whispered echoes from beyond the unseen, exploring our new horizons. Now, the next poem deals with an ethical dilemma. Back in the 1940s and 1950s, the first generation of spaceflight engineers like Werner von Braun and Sergei Korolev had the ethical dilemma that nobody in the world would pay to build space rockets except the military, who wanted them solely as intercontinental ballistic missiles to fling hydrogen bombs on the cities of the enemy. And so I call this poem Playing with Fire. Werner and Sergei played with fire, atomic apocalypse, gambled with our lives to get the bills paid, gambled that you, Faust riding a microchip, would only become our stirrup to the stars. Now from California, let's go over to the Cape Flats, and this is a true story from about 1972. It's called We Demand Physics. When the stars fled Cape Town, the astronomers followed. For stars hide in light. We can only see them in the brightest dark. We who serve the stars left harshly veiled floodlights, smog, and sky glow to astrologers, for astrology thrives on opaqueness. Starlight and irony bathe the Sutherland crew copy, a descendant of British Admiralty now precessed to this desert hill. Tonight, astronomy is looking up. Freddie Marang, night assistant, chicks spinning red dials, green screens, keyboards his commands to electronic eye. Remembers, Belleville South High School didn't teach physics. We demanded physics. 11 of us, 10 boys, 1 girl. So our maths teacher, Jan Presents, did the job. In such ways, the stars help their friends win small victories on the ground. And to end tonight's selection of poems and extracts from poems, I choose the last poem in my collection, Cosmonauts Do It in Heaven, and it's dedicated to our 2 radio astronomers, Bernie Faneroff and Justin Jonas, and it celebrates the Meerkat as the first spark built of the square kilometer array. 64 pylons hold up 64 ears, stitched together with threads of light, listening to the far side of our Milky Way, or blinking in sync for correlated computers huddled inside their Faraday cage, listening to the edgeless edges of a universe with no center, expanding waves washing over stars in the swirling arms of galaxies, listening to whispers from a pulsating vacuum, quantums of oscillating energy, murmurs of dark matter, listening to ions twirling in magnetic fields, listening in on the unknown. Thank you for coming on that voyage with me together.
Does anyone have questions they'd like to ask Keith? We're going to have a short Q&A session and then a short break and an open mic that Melissa is going to chair. But does anyone have questions?
Ed's shot his hand up.
Alt Y.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you, Ed.
Um,
Ed has stuck his hand up first. Go for it, Ed.
Hi, thank you. Keith, thanks so much. It was wonderful to hear those poems again. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, I can.
Okay. I find the book is fascinating as a history of the things you talk about, but I find it astonishing in terms of your imaginative engagement with the subjects in the book. And I think at the very beginning of your reading, you communicated that you'd set out to bridge these two different worlds, or very different worlds. But I think you've done that amazingly, and as much as the book is a celebration of unsung heroes, it's a celebration, I think, of the imagination, because you know, the imaginations of those who theorized about spaceflight or found solutions to challenges, etc. And yeah, I'm rambling, but it's all there in your last poem as well, the ending, listening in on the unknown. So thank you so much, Keith. I only have an appreciation, not actually a question.
I'm glad it worked. I was convinced that we could use as metaphors and allusions spaceflight engineering terminology, just as our poets classically used astronomy, the moon and the stars as metaphors for romance.
Indeed, and I think some of my favorite poems in the book are the ones where you use metaphor in relationships. That the poem about the man in the moon, for example, and Houston, we have a problem. Thanks so much, Keith.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Ed. Jacques, you guys have your hands up.
Yeah, so am I muted now or?
No, I can hear you.
So Keith, the more I hear these poems, the more I'm convinced that this is a really important book. And I suppose my first question is about the way that you keep spinning the globe, you keep moving from east to west in the collection. And of course, many of these poems were written during the Cold War, and that kind of geopolitical dynamic really resonates again today. Sometimes I hear the poems and it feels to me as if all the people in the collection are sort of almost bedeviled by politics, and sometimes it feels to me as if you are sort of transcending that kind of dynamic. You're saying that actually this is part of a broader, all these efforts to do with spacecraft are to do with a larger human effort that transcends ideology and creeds and anything like that. I mean, how do you think and feel about it? How did that adversarial sort of Cold War political scene impact on the poems, and how were you responding to it, do you think?
In selecting the poems for tonight, I was guided by reviewers and literary friends with no science and no engineering background as to which poems work best for them. And so I selected those poems rather than ones which I personally find most exciting. I do try to put spaceflight into a great humanity exploration that's continued from the Phoenicians and the Polynesians down to the present day. I invoke that in another poem, which I didn't read tonight, called Now to Begin, and where I celebrate Ferdinand Magellan and refer to the International Space Station as Magellans of the 92 minutes, because they're orbiting the whole Earth every 92 minutes, whereas Magellan's 3 ships took 3 years to circumnavigate the world. Some of the political dilemmas here are that the founding generation of spaceflight engineers all suffered to varying extents. Werner von Braun was detained in an SS cell and had started a trial before a kangaroo SS court, which would have ended in him being shot within days, had friends not lobbied Hitler to personally intervene and cancel the trial. Sergei Korolev was one of the millions of victims of the Stalin purge of 1937 and spent a year in the Kolyma concentration camp, which had the highest death toll of any gulag. 1/3 of the prisoners died of hypothermia and starvation each year before he was transferred to an indoors concentration camp, which Solzhenitsyn used to model for his novel, The First Circle. It's actually based on the life of Korolev. Then Kian Shu-sin, in the start of the 1950s, became unjustly accused in the McCarthyite scare that panicked the USA. He emigrated to China and was just about to be flung to the dogs in the great cultural proletarian revolution of 1967, and was only saved when Zhou Enlai stationed a platoon of soldiers outside his house to guard him from the Red Guard mobs. So this is very harrowing biographies of that generation of spaceflight engineers.
Across ideological, across ideological boundaries, basically, they all were given a hard time.
Yes, reality is a bit more complex than the code will live on which we were all brought up, if you're my generation, for it over there. There's also other little touches which struck me vividly, which I didn't have time to include tonight. There was a 19th century theoretician of spaceflight called Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, who wrote the rocket equation he composed and who was advocating in the 1890s spacesuits, space stations, liquid hydrogen as a fuel. Now, in the 19th century, he was a maths teacher at a high school at a little Russian town called Kaluga, about 3 hours by bus through thick forest outside Moscow. And when he died, he's buried on a lawn in the street across from this high school. And in the 21st century, that high school science club puts a fresh bouquet of flowers on his grave every week. Mm-hmm. Now, I can't think of any science club in the West which honors the Western pioneers of spaceflight in the same way. And there's a photo in my book of a bunch of flowers across his horizontal tombstone over there. Another fascinating tidbit that I saw both in the Tsiolkovsky Museum and also in the monument to the cosmonauts, is where the rocket equation was set in stained glass window. Now, no science center in the West would think of projecting cutting-edge technology through the medium of a stained glass window. But it shows so incredible is the power of the Russian Orthodox Church over culture that that medium transcends completely the subject celebrated in it over there.
Can I ask something? You
Yeah,
finished?
yeah. Thank you, Keith. Thank you very much. Yes.
Barbara, go ahead as well.
Right.
Keith, thank you so much for such a beautiful and incredibly interesting reading. I just wondered, when did you first fall in love with stars, with space, with all of this? How old were you?
It was as soon as I'd learned to read in sub B and could read newspapers, because I now do remember a 1955 Cape Argus report that Yuri Blagonravov announced in Vienna that the Soviet Union would launch a satellite as its contribution to the International Geophysical Year in 1957-58, which everyone in the West ridiculed, and I was the only one who seemed to be terribly excited about it. So it's since I've been 9 years old, I've just read everything I could on the subject. As a schoolboy, I went to the Cape Center of the Astronomical Society's meetings in the 1960s, when a Professor Stoy was then Her Majesty's astronomer in the Cape. And on and off, I've been going there for half a century too, and I'm just very glad that I've lived long enough to see photographs of every planet from Mercury to Pluto. And thanks to the collection, thanks to your recording, after I've gone, there'll be some record of this to survive for a future generation.
Oh, thank you so much. That's wonderful.
Is there anybody else with a question? Georgia.
Hi there. Oh, sorry. There we go. I'll try. My connection's a bit, so I'll turn the video off if it goes. Keith, thank you so much. That was so incredibly inspiring. And I loved being able to see the poems and the form. I just found it it was riveting all the way through. It was like, it was a cosmic joyride. Thank you so very, very much. I wondered if I could be really cheeky and ask if we might hear the poem that you mentioned, which was the title Now to Begin?
Yes. Okay, let me just find it for you. It's
Thank you so much.
Now, where is it around? Yeah, here it is, 47. I should explain that when Sergei Korolev was showing VIPs around the Baikonur Cosmodrome, he would say, quote, "All that you see is only the beginning of a beginning." And this poem I dedicate to the Mir space station of the 1980s and 1990s, to the current International Space Station, and to the brand new Chinese Tiangong space station, and is called Now to Begin. Here no angels sing, nor winged cherubim, nor seraphim that hover over a God's throne. Here are only Bord Engineer Korabla, Commander Korabla, Cosmonaut Isri Dovatel. Here are only the song of antenna, wingnut seeking a quorum of thread, circuits who commune with quantums. Here, urging the bow on, Leif Erikson, Zheng He, and Phoenicians and Polynesians whose names only the winds recall. Here, squaring the circle, Ferdinand Magellan, Lowell Smith, Yuri Gagarin. Here we cast off umbilicals. Magellans of the 92 minutes construct a kite of cabins, a flock of tetrahedrons. Here, chaos of air hoses and seals, the hatching of crew, motherboards, software, templates. Our learning curve is ballistic. Here we calibrate gauges, docking radar for all who start the journey so others may complete. Here we celebrate all who explore where curiosity leads. Now we begin.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Keith. That was the cherry on top. Thank you. I love the technical language in there, and it's just so rich and gorgeous. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We've got another hand from Jeff. Oh, you muted still?
Sorry, I was muted. Keith, I've so got to know your poems over the years during Lansdowne local meetings and have observed them in their trajectories into space. And I think that this is a very immaculate book. So many of those poems which underwent transformation, extra ignition, or whatever you want to call it, have now come out in this very finished form. One of the many ways in which the book works for me is in your use of references and quotations. The section called Getting High opens with a quote from Shakespeare's Henry V. "Oh, for a muse of fire that would ascend the brightest heaven of invention." Now, so that quote brings to life so many aspects of your own work. The muse of fire, that sort of desire to get involved in these aspirational things, and the literal fire from the rockets and so on that would ascend the brightest heaven of invention. The book is extremely inventive, I think. Some of the imagery is stupefyingly complex. That poem, Now to Begin, which you were reading just a moment ago, has this extraordinary image about wingnuts seeking a quorum of thread, wingnuts seeking a quorum of thread. That really sort of bends the mind to try and sort of get a full understanding of the sensual and intellectual accuracy of that reference. Yes, thanks very much. It was an enjoyable evening.
Thanks. It took me 42 years to compose these poems, and just one small correction: when Jacques said the book came out in 2020, the publisher had already had typeset that 2020, after which the printer said, "I haven't got paper of the quality needed for the color photos, so you'll have to wait a few months while I import high quality paper for color printing." So the book actually came out in 2021. And of course, with lockdown and COVID, the book launch has been stretched over a year or two.
We've also got a question in the chat from Lucille asking if you've dipped into astrology at all, and are you a Pisces?
In the 1960s and 70s, astrology was a hugely popular fad among many of the circles in which I mixed, even students, and I was horrified at how unscientific it is. It's still based on the pre-Copernican myth that the planets orbit around the Earth. It ascribes to planets the powers of gods and other things which are quite unscientific. So I support astronomy and astronautics, not astrology.
All right, is there anyone else who'd like to ask something before we take a break? Doesn't look like it. Charles.
Of what?
Hi, it was a wonderful reading. I see you say it took 42 years of writing. Did you always have this idea right from the beginning that you would eventually write this kind of or publish this kind of a book, or is it just slowly grown over the time?
The poems came one at a time when I was shocked by the tragedy of the space shuttles disintegrating and killing all their crew, or by the thrill of 12 Americans landing on the moon and the various planetary probes. But throughout, I think it was 2019 and 2020, I started ordering the poems in a sequence that it starts off with an imaginary journey through time from Copernicus to Einstein. I call that section Making Space, because those are the people who literally made the way we conceive of space and the universe today. The next section about the pioneering engineers I called Making Out, with a double meaning. Then the next section about reaching orbit I called Getting High, with another double meaning. Then the romance poems and divorce poems came mostly in the section called Phases of the Moon. And then the collection ends with an imaginary flight through the solar system from the sun to Pluto, which is called Sky Beyond Sky, that beautiful line by the late Peter Horn. And I venture out of the solar system with a reference to the square kilometer array.
Right, thanks. And great to hear these poems. Wonderful, thanks.
Thank you, Charles. Anybody else? Otherwise, Jacques, I think you were about to say something before.
I wanted to read a short poem that I don't know that I thought was in conversation with Keith, and I wondered if he knew it. And it's a short poem by Bertolt Brecht. It's called Questions from a Worker Who Reads. Who built Thebes of the 7 gates? In the books, you read the names of kings. Did the kings haul up the lumps of rock? And Babylon many times demolished? Who raised it up so many times? In what houses of gold, glittering Lima, did its builders live? Where, the evening that the Great Wall of China was finished, did the masons go? Great Rome is full of triumphal arches. Who erected them? Over whom did the Caesars triumph? Had Byzantium, much praised in song, only palaces for its inhabitants? Even in fabled Atlantis, the night that the ocean engulfed it, the drowning still cried out for their slaves. The young Alexander conquered India. Was he alone? Caesar defeated the Gauls. Did he not even have a cook with him? Philip of Spain wept when his armada went down. Was he the only one to weep? Frederick II won the 7 Years' War. Who else won it? Every page a victory. Who cooked the feast for the victors? Every 10 years a great man. Who paid the bill? So many reports, so many questions. And I think of your poems every time I read this, Keith. It's that
I do try
sort
to
of question
celebrate
your
some of
poems.
the. I do try to celebrate some of the unsung heroes of astronomy and astronautics, as well as the celebrities.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think on that note, it's probably a good time to wrap up the question section and head off for our 5-minute break before the open mic. Thank you so much, Keith, for sharing with us tonight. It's been wonderful listening.